Abraham's life can be organized with the 10 places he visited and lived during the duration of 175 years lifetime, right? So we studied until the 5th place. Let's revise. The first place is Ur of the Chaldeans. It's the place of birth, and it also signifies the place of sin, right? So that's why Abraham had to leave the Ur of the Chaldean. The second place was Haran, right? Haran. Haran is the intermediate place, right? It's the middle point. It's not the destination. So it doesn't matter how long he stayed there, right? It's not where God wanted him to go ultimately. So Haran was the second, the middle point and the intermediate place. You remember that I told you about this Haran became a territory belonged to Ebelah kingdom. There was a story that is written in the clay tablets, right? A princess of Ebelah kingdom got married with a ruler of Haran, right? I told you I will research the name exactly and we'll share it. So I will show you on the screen. A princess of Ebelah kingdoms. Her name is Jugalum, and the ruler of Haran's name is Ibi-Zikir. If you want to know more about it, you can Google it with a Haran with a double R, 2R, Harran. Sorry. If you Google with the Haran with a double R, you will see what these clay tablets says and what the story between the princess and the ruler. But from here, we can actually notice that a princess was called a princess of Ebelah kingdom, right? Whereas this man is called a ruler of Haran. So we can see that which is bigger, right? Ebelah kingdom is much bigger than Haran, right? Haran is a city, whereas Ebelah was a kingdom, right? So by nature, naturally, smaller city will be submerged to the bigger kingdom. So therefore, Haran became the part of Ebelah kingdom, we can see. However, this is what the clay tablet says that discovered from Aleppo area, but we don't believe, we don't trust what it is said. We are just having an idea from it. What we trust is Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, right? Genesis 12, verse 1 is the foundation, how this idea came from, right? The Genesis 12, verse 1, God says to Abraham, "Now the Lord said to Abraham, go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house." So if there was no relatives, right? Some relatives in Haran, God didn't have to order Abraham to leave the relatives, right? So from there, the idea that Abraham's relatives from Noah, Shem, Arpachshad, Shelah, and Eber, right? They were all alive. If you look at the genealogy chart, they were all surviving and alive when Abraham left Haran. Abraham left Haran 75 years old, right? So even that time, from Noah to Eber, all of them were alive, right? So by the time that Abraham reached Haran, right, we don't know, the Bible doesn't say when he actually moved to Haran, but by the time that Abraham moved to Haran, they were all lived and they were all alive, right? So that's why, according to the Bible, we believe some of them or all of them must have had lived in Haran, and that's why God ordered Abraham to leave the relatives as poor, right? Right. Third place is Shechem, right? It's the first place in Canaan where God appeared to Abraham. And it happened at Abraham's age of 75. The fourth place is between Bethel and Ai. It's the first place Abraham built an altar and called upon the name of the Lord, right? And it's actually the first place Abraham dwell, right? Abraham dwell. He left the Haran. Shechem was actually just a visiting place. It was a passing by place, right? He was passing by Shechem, and God appeared to Abraham. So Abraham didn't really live in Shechem. We'll come to that point later, but Shechem is actually very temporarily that Abraham stayed there. And between Bethel and Ai was the first place, is the place that Abraham dwelt for the first time, dwell long for first time. Right. That happened at 75 years old. And the fifth place we call is Egypt, right? Fifth place was Egypt. The place to visit temporarily due to the famine in the land of Canaan. And we said that happened at his age of 76, right? Because in order to verify that this year is famined, right? That he had to wait until the end of the rainy season, right? And the end of the rainy season is a third month, right? So which means the next year, third month. So Abram must have had waited until the next year, third month to see, this year truly there is no rain. There was no rain. So all the farming, all the agriculture, all the growing grains will be jeopardized and destroyed, right? So he must have waited until around third month of the next year. So when he became 76 years old, that he decided to go down to Egypt. Right, so let's study from 6th place to the 10th place. 6th place is called between Bethel and Ai. Yeah. So he was at the between Bethel and Ai, and he went down to Egypt, right? And then he came back to Bethel and Ai, between Bethel and Ai. Genesis chapter 13, verse 3. Genesis chapter 13, verse 3. And he went on his journey from the Negev as far as Bethel to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai. So, as I said, he came to Haran, and he left the Haran, and he passing by Shechem, and he came to in between Bethel and Ai. And then next year he went down to Egypt, right? And then he immediately came back to Bethel and Ai, right? He immediately came back to Bethel and Ai, in between Bethel and Ai. So it happened, we see it, the incident happened at his age of 76. 76. The same year that Abram went down to Egypt. The first clue why we can see that way is because of the Bible says Abram's intention to go down to Egypt was not to live there, right? Not to dwell there, but to sojourn, right? To sojourn means to have a short trip, to have a travel, right? It was not to stay there long, but it was to just have a trip, just temporarily live there, just to flee from the famine. Genesis chapter 12, verse 10, right? Genesis 12, verse 10. Now there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, right? That sojourn, we studied about it, right? The word sojourn means to stay somewhere temporarily, only for a short time. So Abram's intention, right, going down to Egypt was to stay there for just long enough to escape the famine that was in the land of Canaan. So when it came to the time of cultivating the land, right? When it came to the time of scattering the seeds, the Abram must have had to return to the land of Canaan again, the Bethel, between Bethel and Ai, right? Because he just escaped. He just escaped from the time of famine. So in order to make next year fruitful, he had to come back to the between Bethel and Ai and cultivate the land and scatter the seed. So we see that the time Abram came back, returned to between Bethel and Ai, was the same year that he went down to went down to Egypt. So that was when he was 76 years old. Second clue is, while Abram was in Egypt, although it happened because of Abram lied about his wife Sarah, right? He lied about his wife and introduced her to the king of Egypt as his sister, right? So the king of Egypt tried to take her as wife, and then God appeared and stopped him. So at the end of it, what happened is the king of Egypt gave Abraham a lot of positions, a lot of wealth, a lot of monies, right? So Abraham became rich, right? As I said, his main intention was to just to flee from the time of famine, right? And he became rich in Egypt, right? So there is no reason why he needed to stay in Egypt any longer, right? He just wanted to escape from the time of famine, and he already became additionally he became rich there. So Abram must have had desire to come back to his hometown, right? His place where he used to live. Oh, I became rich already. There was no reason for him to stay there any longer, right? So second clue is that God made him rich while he was in Egypt. Genesis chapter 13, verse 1 to 2. Genesis chapter 13, verse 1 to 2. So Abram went up from Egypt to Negev, and he and his wife and all that belonged to him, and Lot with him. Now Abram was very rich in livestock and in silver and in gold. So God made him rich while he was in Egypt. Of course, it was through the incident of Sarah, but anyway, Abraham became rich. So he didn't have any reason to stay there any longer, right? So the period of Abraham staying in between Bethel and Ai after he came back from Egypt was from Abraham's age of 76 to 83. 76 is 2090 BC, and 83 is 2083 BC. Once again, 76 is 2090 BC, and 83 is 2083 BC. So then, how do we know that Abraham stayed in between Bethel and Ai until his age of 83? Right? We studied about what happened when he left Egypt and came back to between Bethel and Ai. And how do we know that Abraham stayed until his age of 83? The first clue is this. Genesis chapter 15 describes about what? Genesis chapter 15 is famous for what? Thank you. The ratification of the covenant of the touch, right? Genesis chapter 15 describes about ratification of the covenant of the touch. And we all know that it happened when Abram was 84 years old, right? Abram was 84 years old. That was 2082 BC, right? And as a preceding event, Genesis chapter 14 describes a big war between 4 allied nations of the east and the 5 allied nations of Canaan, right? We heard about this battle. We heard about this war so many times before, right? During this war, as you know, Lot was captured by 4 allied nations. So Abraham, with his 318 trained people, chased after them, fought with them, and took back Lot and many other people, right? He didn't only save Lot, he saved many other people as well. That's why when he was coming down to land of Canaan again, the king of Sodom came, right, and said, "What? All the belonging you take, but people, please return them to me," right? So Abraham must have a lot of possession from this fight, and also a lot of people. Genesis chapter 14, verse 14 to 15. Genesis chapter 14, verse 14 to 15. And when Abraham heard that his relative had been taken captive, he led out his trained men born in his house, 318, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. And he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus. The distance from Hebron to Dan, the distance from Hebron to Dan is 191 kilometer. 191 kilometer. And from Dan to Damascus is 75 kilometer. 75 kilometer. And from Damascus to Hobah is about 80 kilometer. So in total, the distance from Hebron to Hobah is 346 kilometer. 346 kilometer. This isn't short distance, right? It must have had taken quite some time to fight at Dan and chase after them, right? And fight at Hobah to take Lot back, right? This 346 kilometers long, but also it's not a just trip. It was not a business trip. It was not a sightseeing trip, right? It was a fight. In the battle, you don't tell your enemy that I'm going to retreat until Dan, right? I'm going to retreat until Hobah, so let's fight again at Hobah, right? You don't tell your enemy where you are going, right? Where you are retreating to. Therefore, in letters, it's easy for us. It's easy to see that he from Hebron he chased after Dan, right, and then to Damascus, and then to Hobah. But in reality, Abraham didn't know where these enemies will go, right, or to go. He had to just chase until he met the enemies. And he had to find a good time, good moment to attack them, to win against them, right? Therefore, this battle, this war, the senior pastor, Reverend Abraham Paul, regarded and saw this battle must be lasted longer than about an year. This battle, this war, must be about an year-long war and battle. It's not just a trip, but it was a battle. And Abraham traveled about 346 kilometers. Therefore, it must be a long battle. It couldn't be short short time war, but it must be very long and took about an year to finish it. And Genesis 15 and 14 is connected, right? We studied about it. The Genesis chapter 14 events and 15 events occurred in the right after to it, right? So that as the ratification of the covenant of the torch happened at Abraham's age of 84, right? That this war between Abraham and this four allied nation happened at his age of 83, right? 83. Yep. The second clue Second clue is this. Genesis chapter 13 verse 6. Genesis chapter 13 verse 6. It says that Abram and Lot couldn't stay together because they both became rich, right? We were talking about Bethel, between Bethel and Ai, right? Between Bethel and Ai was the place they came back from Egypt, right? And from Egypt, Abram left Egypt at his age of 76, right? And we said the war between Abram and this four-allied nation happened at his age of 83, right? So there is only about 7 years. And in these 7 years, Abram was rich because while he was in Egypt, God made him rich. But the Lot also became so rich, right? So that these two family or these two herdsmen cannot share the same territory anymore, right? And Senior Pastor Evan Park saw that this also take quite some time to become rich, right? You cannot just become rich in a year in agricultural society, right? If you're having a Bitcoin, right? These days, this virtual coin or whatever, the Bitcoin is a very big trend. And if you have this kind of a jackpot, you can become rich, super rich in a year. But in that time, right, Lot couldn't become rich, right? Rich enough that they have to separate from each other. It will take quite some time. So, that was the second reason why Senior Pastor saw that Abram and Lot must have lived until the time that Abram became about 83 years old. They needed about this time to both become rich. Especially when we look at Genesis chapter 13 verse 6, Hebrew word for to dwell. It says the land could not sustain them while dwelling together, right? So land cannot sustain for them dwelling together, right? Hebrew word for to dwell is yashab. And yashab, it means to dwell and to live long, live permanently, right? Abram only stayed short and temporarily in Shechem and Bethel and Ai, right? The fourth place, Bethel and Ai, and Egypt. He only stayed temporarily there, but when he came back to between Bethel and Ai, he stayed and lived there long, right? Long enough to make both Abram and Lot rich that they couldn't stay together. So Abram came back to between Bethel and Ai at his age of 76 and stayed there until 83 years old, and moved to Hebron at his age of 83, studied the battle with the four allied nations in East at his age of 83, ended the battle at his age of 84, and ratified the covenant of the torch at his age of 84. Do you get it? I'll read it one more time, right? This is the sequence. Abraham came back to Bethel and Ai at his age of 76 and stayed there until 83 years old and moved to Hebron at his age of 83. I will explain about that moving to Hebron a little later, and studied the battle with the four allied, chase after this four allied nation at his age of 83, and ended the battle at his age of 84, because it took about an year, right? And then ratified the covenant of the torch at his age of 84. Yeah, that is the sequence of what happened in Abraham's life there, right? So now seventh place is Hebron, right? Hebron. Hebron is the place where Abraham moved his tent after separating with Lot. Genesis chapter 13, verse 8 to 9. Genesis chapter 13, verse 8 to 9. Then Abraham said to Lot, please let there be no strife between you and me, nor between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If to the left, then I will go to the right. Or if to the right, I will go to the left. Because Lot's herdsmen and Abraham's herdsmen quarreled each other, Abraham suggested Lot to choose the land he wants to go first, right? If you go to the left, then I will go to the right. If you go to the right, then I will go to the left. It suggests that when Lot left to go to Sodom, Abraham also had to leave the place between Bethel and Ai. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Abraham said, please leave me so that I can stay here safely. Abraham didn't say that. Abraham said, if you choose to go to the left, then I will choose to go to the right. I will leave this place, right? That was what Abraham promised Lot. You choose wherever you want to go, right? Then I will choose wherever I want to go. That doesn't crash each other, right? So Abraham was almost suggesting, let's leave this Bethel and Ai now, right? You go from left here, or go right here, then I'll go left or right according to you, according to your decision, right? So Hebron is the place when Lot left Abraham, that Abraham moved to. Do you understand? Because Lot moved to Sodom, that Abraham moved to Hebron. So the time of moving to Hebron was when Lot left Abraham. But because he promised that he will go also, so he moved to Hebron when Lot left Abraham in between Bethel and Ai. So Senior Pastor Reverend Abraham Park sees that the time when Abraham moved to Hebron was at his age of 83. That's why moving to Hebron was in between is before the starting the battle with the four allied nations. You remember the distance, the total distance that Abraham chased after? Where did we start? We didn't start from Bethel and Ai. We start from Hebron to Dan, right? Hebron to Dan, Dan to Damascus, Damascus to Hobah, right? Hebron, right? So before this, Abraham fought against these four allied, or chased after four allied nations to save Lot, we can see that Abraham already moved to Hebron. Abraham already moved to Hebron, and the instant happened right before chasing after four allied nations was quarreling with Lot's herdsmen, separating from Abraham. So we can see that because when Lot left Abraham, right, and went down to Sodom, that was the time that Abraham also left Bethel and Ai and moved to Hebron. So when Abraham was about to save or chase after these four allied nations, that Abraham was at Hebron. So Genesis chapter 13, verse 18. Genesis chapter 13, verse 18. Then Abraham moved his tent and came and dwelt by the oaks of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. So Abraham lived in Hebron until he went to Gerar, right? The Gerar. So we know the time when he started living in Hebron, right? 83 years old. The time Abraham went down to Gerar was at his age of 99. 99. Therefore, we can see that Abraham stayed in Hebron from his age of 83, that was 2083 BC, until 99, that was 2067 BC. 2067 BC. There are many events and incidents happen while Abraham was staying in Hebron, right? I think that you have this box there, right? You have a box there. The war between Abraham and the four allied nations happened. That was described in Genesis chapter 14. It happened during while Abraham was in Hebron. Then the covenant of the torch happened. The Genesis chapter 15, right, happened while he was in Hebron. Then the birth of Ishmael, Genesis chapter 16, happened while he was in Hebron. And the covenant of circumcision, Genesis chapter 17, happened while he was in Hebron. The warning of the destruction of the city of Sodom, Genesis chapter 18, right, happened while he was in Hebron. Finally, the destruction of Sodom, Genesis chapter 19, happened while he was in Sodom. You have the lecture note, right? So I don't have to repeat it, right? Among these events, covenant of circumcision, which is in Genesis 17, and the warning of the destruction of the city of Sodom, which is in Genesis 18, and the destruction of Sodom, which is in Genesis 19, happened at Abraham's age of 99. Genesis 17, 18, 19, they all happened when Abraham was 99 years old. Right, let's come to 8th place is Gerar, right? Gerar. Genesis 20 verse 1. Genesis 20 verse 1. Now Abraham journeyed from there toward the land of Negev and settled between Kadesh and Shur. Then he sojourned in Gerar. Again, he sojourned in Gerar. So we can see that it was a temporal visit, right? Gerar is the place where Abraham resided after the destruction of Sodom. Gerar is the place where Abraham resided after the destruction of Sodom. In English and Korean version, it sounds like the Gerar is located in between Kadesh and Shur, right? Because it says, now Abraham journeyed from there toward the land of the Negev and settled between Kadesh and Shur. Then he sojourned in Gerar, right? So it sounds like Gerar is located somewhere in between Kadesh and Shur, right? However, it isn't. Gerar is not located in between Kadesh and Shur. And also, Kadesh and Shur are not nearby cities. It's not Kuala Lumpur and Selangor, right? It's not nearby cities. It's more like Thailand than Singapore, right? It's too far. You cannot stay in between Kadesh and Shur. There are so many things in between Kadesh and Shur, right? And especially Gerar is not there anyway. So according to Hebrew text, the better interpretation is Abram went through the roads between Kadesh and Shur and settled in Gerar. So he traveled there. Yes, the Kadesh and Shur, he traveled there. But after that, he settled in Gerar. He settled in Gerar. That was the better understanding of this verse. Right, when Abram came to Gerar, what happened? He met the king of Gerar, right? Whose name is Abimelech. And what happened? Abram, once again, lied about, Sarah, isn't it? Lied about Sarah. He made the same mistake that he made to the king of Egypt, right? He worried that because of Sarah that he could be killed, right? So he lied that Sarah is not his wife but his sister. As I said, this happened at his age of 99, right? So that makes Sarah 89 years old. Yeah, this is still the mystery, how the 89 years old lady could be so charming and so beautiful. The king of a country, king of a nation wants to have her, right? King must have so many women, right? Women, and so many girls around him. However, that the desire that they wanted to have Sarah as their wife is another mystery that we need to study, and we need to research, and we need to pray about it. 89 years old lady was so charming. The king of Gerar wanted to have her. Genesis chapter 20 verse 2. Genesis chapter 20 verse 2. But by the way, I pray that may all the ladies here in the Lord's Covenant Church receive such blessing. So at your age of old age, that you may still be beautiful, you may still be charming, right, in the eyes of God. Amen. Amen. Oh, you don't want this blessing? Amen. So Genesis 20 verse 2. And Abram said of Sarah his wife, she is my sister. So Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. Hebrew word for to take here is lakach. And it means to take someone for marriage, or to take something for good, right? This is to take something for eternity, right? This is not borrow someone or borrow something for temporal period. It is more like I'm taking it. It's mine from now on, right? So king of Abimelech took Sarah to make her his wife. It's not that he invited her to come to his table or to stay at his house for a while. It's not. The Abimelech's intention was to take Sarah as his wife. That's what lakach means. But God appeared in the king's dream and prevent him from doing anything to her, right? Now we have to think about this one more time. I mean, when it happened to king of Egypt, we thought, oh, maybe it was because right after it, right? I mean, it was because Abram was not spiritually grown up. But this time, king of Abimelech, the Gerar, Abram was 99 years old. He was about to have Isaac, isn't it? He was about to have Isaac. Isaac was born when Abram was 100 years old. But still, we can see that until this moment, Abram was not entirely trusting God for his promise and his protection. Can you see that? I think this just projects our life, right? Of course, we want to become, great believer and strong believer, and we want to become a man of faith. But we can see from Abraham that he doubted and unbelieved, right? Until when he was about 99 years old. Of course, one moment he believed and he doubted about it. One moment he believed and doubted about it. One moment he believed and doubted about it, right? However, because God planned to save Abraham and made him the father of faith, God kept working with him and growing him to become the one that fits for his plan. When we study about Abraham becoming the father of faith, we thought, oh, Abraham was a great man of faith, that he believed so well that God, acknowledged and proclaimed that, oh, Abraham is the father of faith. But when we study through this book number 10, it isn't the ability. It isn't because of ability of Abraham. It isn't because of his own ability of Abraham. But it was because God planned to do so. It was because God's covenant. God planned to make Abraham the father of faith. God planned to use the Lord's Covenant Church to save Malaysia. God planned to use you and me to become blessing to all nations, to all the people around us, right? Therefore, God will use us. God will work with us. God will use us. God will grow us spiritually so that we, until the time we finally become the blessing to all nations, blessing to all the people around us. Amen? Once again, it's not our ability. It's not how strong we believe. But it was because God planned. Because God God designed it. So I truly pray that may this God's bestower, may this God's plan, may this God's design be upon all of you, so that you, leave the presence of the Lord, but grow spiritually and become the person who fits for the fulfillment of God's plan, and who will please our Father God from now on forevermore. Amen. Right. So 9th place after the Gerar, right? 9th place is Beersheba. After the incident of meeting the king of Gerar, the Bible describes about the birth of Isaac, right? Birth of Isaac. Genesis chapter 21 is the chapter describing about the birth of Isaac. However, the Bible doesn't tell us where Isaac was born. The Bible doesn't tell us when Abraham moved from Gerar to Beersheba. Then how do we determine, how do we know that it happened? Firstly, I think the same reason, right? The first clue is the same, that the Bible used and described that Abraham only went down to Gerar to sojourn there, right? To stay there temporarily, right? Abraham's we read it about it, right? Is in Genesis 20 verse 1. Genesis 20 verse 1. Now Abram journeyed from there toward the land of Negev and settled between Kadesh and Shur. Then he sojourned in Gerar, right? He sojourned means it's a short trip, right? It's not, his intention was not stay there long, but it was a short trip. So it suggests that Abram must have moved to another place immediately, right? Immediately after it, right after it. But how the second clue about the place of the birth of Isaac is because we can see from the incident of Ishmael mocking his younger brother Isaac. All right? What happened is the Isaac was born, right? And Ishmael harassed him and mocked him, right? And Sarah witnessed about his mocking. So he waited it. She waited it, but then she couldn't wait anymore. So she told Abraham that the Ishmael is mocking our promised son, right? So you have to kick Hagar and Ishmael out of this house, right? And God confirmed that what Sarah said is my will, so you have to follow her. So Abraham followed and kicked Hagar and Ishmael out of the house. And the place where this Hagar and Ishmael went, right, was described as the wilderness of Beersheba, right? Genesis chapter 21, verse 14. Genesis 21, verse 14. So Abram rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar, putting them on her shoulder, and gave her the boy and sent her away. And she departed and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. So this tells us that Abraham must have lived around Beersheba at that time, right in front of the wilderness of Beersheba, right? The moment that they were kicked out, the place they went to, they encountered, right, was the wilderness of Beersheba. So that tells us that Abraham must have lived in Beersheba at that time. And when was this about? When was it? When was this, the kicking out Hagar and Ishmael happened? It happened when Isaac was about to be weaned, right? When Isaac was weaned, Isaac stopped having breastfeeding, right? Yeah, weaned. That was when it happened. Normally, for the sake of baby and for the sake of mother, right? If you can afford, normally house doesn't move, family doesn't move a house, right? From the time of the birth of a baby until the time of weaning, right? Time of weaning, right? According to that culture, according to that kind of common knowledge, we can see that when Isaac was born, Abraham must have already lived in Beersheba. Abraham must have had lived in Beersheba already by the time of Isaac's birth. And that actually fits, that is in line with the other scriptures, right? Because Abraham went down to Gerar only for a short time. So immediately, right after he must move to another place, that is Beersheba. And there, of course, that time what happened? The Sarah was pregnant, became pregnant, right? I mean, almost immediately Sarah became pregnant, right? Otherwise, she cannot give a birth at when Abraham was 100 years old, right? So right after immediately Sarah became pregnant. All that happened while he was in Beersheba. And yeah, we can see that. So Beersheba came out from that background, that story. Right. Then, until when Abraham stayed at Beersheba? Until when? Genesis chapter 22, verse 19. Genesis chapter 22, verse 19 says that after offering up Isaac, Abraham came back to Beersheba. After offering up Isaac, Abraham came back to Beersheba. So we can see that he lived in Beersheba before he offered up Isaac, and he also came back to Beersheba after offering up Isaac. Genesis 22, verse 19. So Abram returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abram lived at Beersheba. You know, there is very important thing to learn here. So if you didn't hear it clearly, if you haven't listened to it clearly until now, it's okay. I think if you learn this thing clearly today, that is good enough, right? I'm giving you the most important lesson about this today. Genesis 22 verse 19, it says, So Abram returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba, and Abram lived at Beersheba, right? The first verb, return, is singular form, singular, right? Second and third, which is arose and went, are plural form, plural form. And then finally, the fourth, lived, right, is a singular form again. Why it is important? I will tell you now. So what it means is Abraham, after God stopped Abraham from killing Isaac, right? So Abraham returned to his young man Isaac, right? And the day Abraham and Isaac arose and went together, went down from the Mount Moriah together, right? That is correct. But Abraham lived at Beersheba, which means Isaac didn't. The Bible doesn't say they lived at Beersheba. Abraham lived at Beersheba means Isaac didn't live at Beersheba. So after the offering of Isaac incident, right? Isaac left Abraham. Abraham and Isaac didn't live together. I will share about this in next time in detail, but this is confirmed also by the scripture, another scripture as well. As a preview. So where did Isaac go then? If he didn't return to Beersheba, where did he go? Any idea? Isaac went to Beel Lahai Loi. Beel Lahai Loi. When Sarah died, the Bible described that Isaac was coming from Beel Lahai Loi, right? So we can see that after offering up Isaac, Abraham returned to Beersheba, but Isaac went to Beel Lahai Loi and stayed there, right? So the period Abraham stayed in Beersheba was from his age of 100, that was 2066 BC, right, 2066 BC, until 136 years old, that is 2030 BC, 136 years old, 2030 BC. It is because Sarah died at her age of 127, right? Sarah died at her age of 127, which makes Abraham 137 years old, right? 137 years old. And offering of Isaac was occurred while Sarah was still alive. You remember when God appeared to Abraham and tell him to sacrifice your only son Isaac, right? Abraham couldn't tell his wife, right? He kept in himself and arose early morning and obeyed what God said to him, right? So we can see that Sarah was still alive by the time. Thus, we see the incident of offering of Isaac happen at least before when Abraham became 136 years old, right? 136 years old. But just for the sake of easiness, we just see that it happened at his age of 136. Now, final place, the 10th place is Hebron. There, Sarah is the place where Sarah died. And Abraham buried her in the cave of Machpelah, which was in Hebron. Therefore, Abraham went down to Gerar, then up to Beersheba, then came back to Hebron, right? Hebron is the place where Sarah and Abraham were buried. Genesis chapter 23, verse 2. And Sarah died at Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham went in to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her, right? So it says Sarah died at Hebron, right? Genesis 25, verse 9. Then his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar, the Hittite, facing Mamre. This is about the death of Abraham, right? Isaac and Ishmael came and buried him in the cave of Machpelah that is in Hebron, right? Genesis chapter 23 verse 1. Genesis chapter 23 verse 1. Now Sarah lived 127 years. These were the years of the life of Sarah. So Sarah died at the age of 127. The period when Abraham stayed in Hebron was from his age of 137, right? 2029 BC, 137, 2029 BC to 175, 1991 BC, 1991 BC. As you know, the significance of purchasing the cave of Machpelah was that Abraham secured the foothold of Canaan land, right? The significance of purchasing the cave of Machpelah was that Abraham secured the foothold of Canaan land. Right, what it means, I think the easiest way to understand is, according to our culture, according to our Asian culture, we don't bury our parents or ancestors to the land that doesn't belong to us, right? We don't. We only bury our parents and ancestors where the land, it belongs to us. Of course, nowadays we use this burial place, right? But it's still the same idea. You purchase the land, at least, you purchase the ownership of the piece of the land for about 40 years or maybe 70 years, right? You own the land in order to bury your parents or ancestors, right? So by the fact that Abraham was buried, Abraham's tomb, Abraham's grave is there in the land of Canaan, in Hebron, in the cave of Machpelah, it shows that what? Right? It shows that ownership of that land, right? It belonged to us. Otherwise, we cannot, we couldn't bury our ancestor in this land, right? As long as the grave, as long as the tomb is there, right? The ownership belongs to Israel. The cave of Machpelah, the tomb of Abraham, became the foothold that Israel later on argued with the Philistines that this land belonged to us. This land belonged to us. If anyone questioned how the land of Canaan belonged to Israel, they can refer to, we have cave here. We have a cave, our ancestors here, right? You don't bury your ancestor where the place it doesn't belong to you, right? Same with us. The fact that our the Abrahams and our ancestors are buried here, it just simply means that this land was ours, right? This land was ours. Right, that is written in Genesis chapter 23, verse 18 to 20. Genesis chapter 23, verse 18 to 20. And you can read the scripture at home. After the death of Sarah, Isaac got married at Abram's age of 140, while Abram married to Keturah, right? Abram took another lady, and Isaac got married. So that finished the 10 places that Abram visited and stayed. The conclusion today is, again, despite the repeated unbelief and doubts of Abraham, in order to fulfill his covenant, God's covenant, God kept working with Abraham and growing him to become the true blessing to all nations. Today, we are weak, but God will keep working in us and with us and growing us to become the true blessing to all the people around us. Amen? Even if you are weak, even if you are fragile, even if you are unsuccessful for the time being, do not worry. God promised to make you the blessing to all nations, right? Amen? Amen. So God will fulfill his promise. Even though we repeatedly doubt about it, we repeatedly downcast and depressed about it, right? However, God will keep working in us and with us, and God will keep growing us, and He will finally, eventually use us and make us the blessing so that we can share this blessing to all nations and all the corners of Malaysia and all the people that are around us. Amen.